This is why dogs follow you into the bathroom. I never knew this. This is why dogs follow you everywhere. If you have a dog, you get to know his behavior. He may know that he does certain things. However, he may not know why he does those things. Since your dog can't speak to you on his own, you may not know why he behaves the way he does. If you want to know more about your dog, well, keep watching. Here are 12 things that your dog does, and he's actually trying to tell you something. Number 1, puppy dog eyes. If your dog has ever looked at you with those puppy dog eyes, he's doing more than just trying to get you to fall in love with him when he looks up at you with those adorable eyes. He's trying to show you that he loves you. He's also trying to enforce a greater trust between you and him. Number 2, following you around. You ever been walking around the house just to find your dog is following you everywhere? This is why dogs follow you into the bathroom. Now I did. I never knew this, but dogs follow you around the house and into the bathroom because it's their instinct to want to be with you and do things with the family. He's not following you because he wants to invade your privacy. He's doing it because he just wants to be with you.
Which actually attaches itself or even enters the person in order to cause him trouble.
She takes a picture, and in that picture is this ET. He puts the camera over in that direction, and everyone looking in that direction at that moment saw it. You can make contact with these civilizations, and you do not need the government.
From the inside. Think violent psychotic outbreaks or sudden and extreme depression. Maybe even a complete change of personality. Finally, there are fairies, which are spirits who present themselves physically and interact with humans in a direct way. That would include leading a person to danger, having sexual intercourse with them, or transporting them from one location to another. However, predating King James's 4 types of demons was a list of 6, except these were determined by where the demons reside. This classification was created by the 1st century Byzantine monk, Michael Psellos, and is as follows. First are the Lilirium, who are the most powerful demons of the 6, and they inhabit the ether, which is beyond the moon. Second are the Aerial, which are demons of the air and atmosphere, below the moon. Third are the Terrestrial, who reside on land. Fourth are the Marine, who live in the water. Fifth are the Subterranean, who live in a network of cave systems and hollow pockets deep beneath the earth. Shoutouts to my last video, Inner Earth Conspiracies. A sequel is coming next week, by the way. The 6th and final type are the Lucifugus, which are the lowest and weakest demons of the 6, and they reside in the lowest hell. They are completely blind and almost entirely senseless. Speaking of weak and powerful demons, the monk Michael Psellos did elaborate on the abilities of these demons, explaining that the highest and most powerful would try to attack a person's mind in order to manipulate their imagination and produce vivid illusions. On the other hand, the lowest and weakest couldn't do much more than grunt and act instinctually. They are simply attracted to the warmth of a living human and are otherwise completely mindless and rather disgusting. From all this, we can see that there are many types of demons, as well as hundreds of individual demons with a name and title. So that begs the question that nobody asked. Just how many demons are there in existence, literally speaking? Well, based on the book of Revelation, there's an idea that 1/3 of all angels turned into fallen angels. But believe it or not, there are some exact numbers we can reference, which were calculated using extremely complicated systems of data points taken from both scripture and occult writings. For example, the 16th century demonologist Johann Weyer calculated the number of demons in existence as 4,439,622, which was then divided into 666 legions, with each legion made up of 6,666 demons, all of them ruled by 66 dukes, princes, and kings of hell. But if you think that's a bit of a conservative number, then consider the 15th century Catholic bishop, Alfonso de Spina. who calculated the exact population of demons as 133,316,666. But then there's the problem of procreation. Think about this for a second. If demons can create offspring with human women, as we've seen in the book of Genesis, then there's no way this number would ever be constant. I suggest we leave it to the experts to figure this one out. And with that, it's finally time to move on to the meat of today's presentation. What it takes to summon and command a demon, and what that might actually look like in practice. When someone talks about summoning a demon, they're referring to Solomonic magic, which is derived from a number of ancient grimoires, which are said to date all the way back to the reign of King Solomon, a biblical king and the builder of the first temple in Jerusalem. Beyond being an extremely important historical monarch who ruled from the year 970 BC to 931, according to a vast number of legends, Solomon was also one of the most powerful magicians and exorcists to ever live. Perhaps the very first text on demonology was the Testament of Solomon, which is believed by many occultists to have been written by King Solomon himself, though this is debated and the Testament of Solomon is not considered canonical scripture. Its origins, however, are at least 2,000 years old, making it older than the Book of Revelation. The Testament of Solomon supposedly documents how Solomon built his temple, and that was by means of summoning and commanding a number of powerful demons, using a magical ring engraved by God. The text is comprised mainly of interviews with these demons, in which Solomon tries to extract information about their evil deeds, their weaknesses, and how they might be defeated. But how did Solomon summon these demons in the first place? Well, the key lies in this ring gifted to him by the Archangel Michael, which bears the seal of God, which is a pentagram. This ring and seal are used to stamp the chest of the demon in order to enslave them. This idea of a seal is perhaps the most important concept in the art of summoning demons, because just as God has a unique seal, so does every demon. Later Solomonic grimoires elaborated on the seals of individual demons, which could also be used to control them. Of course, demons prefer to keep their seals hidden, because if one is discovered or possibly revealed by another demon under torture and interrogation, this is their primary vulnerability, at least according to Solomonic magic. Solomonic magic is corrupting, though, and most who practice it are said to, at some point, become overwhelmed and abandon their beliefs in favor of some great temptation, thus losing the spirit of God and also their command over the demon. In the Testament of Solomon, King Solomon himself falls victim to this and ends up worshipping the demons Remphan and Moloch in exchange for sex with a Shunammite woman. At the end of the text, he gives his grave warning to the reader not to follow in his footsteps. So, with that being said, we're about to learn what actually goes into summoning and controlling a demon, and I strongly recommend that you do not actually try these techniques, as they are from real grimoires, and I'm only relaying this information for the sake of being obsessively complete in our investigation of Christian demonology. Demon summoning is considered high magic and very powerful. Low magic can be thought of as simple witchcraft, such as hexing someone you don't like. On the other hand, high magic is extremely intensive and exhausting, and it takes a serious toll on the practitioner. But this is what summoning a demon requires, if not external sacrifices as well. To begin, there are two ways to summon a spirit, whether it be a demon, an angel, or some other supernatural entity. The first is evocation, which is when one calls upon the name of the entity. In the case of demons, though, typically they would be evoked in the name of God. The second method is conjuration, which uses magical spells to form a sort of pact with the demon. The word conjure in Latin literally translates to swear together. In either case, the summoner would be using a variety of wands, incense, and daggers to complete the ritual, and below them, they would draw magical Solomonic diagrams, either on the ground or on parchment. Finally, the seal of the demon is what's required to complete this diabolical act. Now, why would anyone want to summon a demon? Well, in King Solomon's case, he enslaved them to help build his temple. And this is true in many other instances where the summoner wants the demon to serve them in some way, whether it be for good or for evil. Others might summon a demon in order to ask it a favor, usually related to whatever power the demon is associated with, or to educate oneself in the body of knowledge that the demon specializes in. More than that, there was actually a religious order of Roman Catholic theologians and clerics in the late 1400s, known as the Carmelites, and they were involved in a massive scandal for being publicly open about their demon summoning practices, which they called non-heretical. They believed summoning demons was okay for the purpose of asking them specific questions and recording responses in order to learn about the nature of the demonic world. But just like King Solomon, it turned out that over time, many of the Carmelites ended up summoning demons no longer to ask questions, but to win sexual favors from women and to discover the locations of buried treasure. You can see how good intentions quickly get corrupted when dealing with these beings. And with that final warning, it's time for some summoning action. To begin, I'll give you an example of how one might summon a demon according to the important Solomonic grimoire, the Key of Solomon, which dates back to the 14th century. The summoner begins by drawing a magical circle around themselves on the ground, after which they must draw a magical triangle immediately outside of that circle. These are, of course, highly complex diagrams that must be drawn in exact detail, or the ritual will fail. During this process, the summoner wears the seal of the demon they intend to summon, and after drawing the magical diagrams, they must take the seal and place it into the triangle while reciting incantations, which are a very specific series of words, typically in Latin. If every detail is exactly as it should be, the demon is literally supposed to appear within that triangle, in a physical form that the summoner can both see and interact with. For example,
Is this
if
what you were
a person
looking
wanted
for?
to summon one of the seven
We were
kings of
kind of
hell,
looking for some
they
dark
would need
pills.
to appeal to each
You
demon
were
in
sort of
the
looking
correct
for
order
dark pills.
to reach the demon they actually
You might
intend on summoning.
like.
You can see how this can quickly get complex, because the summoner must not only be aware of the hierarchy of
He
demons,
might would
but
like.
painstakingly navigate the
He
bureaucracy
might
of
would
hell.
like.
Even if a person wanted to summon and control a lesser demon,
I sure
they would
love you,
still need to
Beanie.
evoke the names of that demon's
Sure
superiors.
do love you.
Moving on, it's now time to teach you in detail how
Sure.
to summon the
love
devil,
you.
which, again, I really do not recommend you do. Regardless, it's likely
you
that over the
fucking
years, these steps have been
You
altered to
fucking
prevent
bitch.
people from actually doing it. These instructions come from the diabolical grimoire known as the Red Dragon, which is another Solomonic grimoire allegedly discovered in 1750 within the actual tomb
You know I
of
love
King
you.
Solomon. Today, the original copy is held in the Vatican archives of the Catholic Church, hence why I believe it's been altered. Many occultists consider this grimoire in particular to be one of the most potent and dangerous in existence. This is because inside of it, there are very specific instructions about how a person should go about summoning the most powerful and evil demons in existence, particularly Lucifer, the devil. The Red Dragon Grimoire also gives methods of constructing special tools and instruments to enslave the demon after it's been summoned. However, it also gives the user the option of completely forgoing these tools at the expense of forging a binding pact with the demon. That is, to sell one's soul. As for summoning Lucifer, the person conducting the ritual would first need to
Bernie, I
evoke
love
the
you.
name of
Come here,
God and the
honey.
Trinity, which
Come
is
here,
the Father, the
honey.
Son,
Come
and the
here,
Holy Ghost,
honey.
and then command Lucifer
Honey.
to exit hell using an
Here,
incantation.
honey. Here, honey.
There are two phases of
There's
this,
also
with
this
two
kind.
distinct incantations that must be performed perfectly. At this point, Lucifer is supposed to appear within the Solomonic triangle.
Oh, whoopsie. Mama,
If he
sorry.
doesn't,
Here
the
go.
summoner needs to use an instrument known as a blasting rod and
Here,
dip
Mama,
two
help you.
ends of
Mama
the
gonna
rod's
help
fork
you, baby.
into a cursed
Mama
fire.
gonna help you.
This will result in the horrible cries of 1,000,000 spirits from hell, which the author of the
Mama
Red
gonna
Dragon
help
Grimoire
you.
advises the reader
Mama
not
gonna
to be
help
frightened
you.
of. These spirits are being tortured in order to force Lucifer to act. The summoner must then proceed to a third incantation, where all
Here's
the names of
another
God
one.
are evoked, and
Here's
Lucifer's
another
demon
one.
legion are again threatened with the blasting rod.
Yeah, Baronet's nice. He's a good
That
boy.
doesn't work. There is a fourth and final incantation, known as the Grand Invocation of the Great Kabbalah, which is by far the most esoteric and complex, and the
Here,
user
Mama
is
gonna get you
instructed
some,
to
baby.
say it
Just a minute.
twice, absolutely perfectly.
Love you. Just a
If
minute.
all of these steps are done correctly, Lucifer will definitely appear, according to the grimoire. Finally,
Okay.
the summoner must converse with Lucifer and convince him to submit to their control.
Her girl, Brody.
This is done through torture,
It's a good
using both the
kind.
blasting rod and the grand invocation of the Great Kabbalah.
He likes those kind.
Of course, summoning demons, and especially the devil, comes with risk, particularly that of possession. In the case of the Red Dragon, the user is instructed to form their Solomonic triangle using a bloodstone and 2 blessed candles in order to protect themselves.
Here, Bernie, just a minute. Mama's
However,
going to
the
get you
risk
more.
isn't as huge as you'd think.
We're going to
This
get
is
you more. Here,
because the
Bernie.
main purpose of
Here,
Solomonic
Brown.
magic is to tempt
Here,
demons
Brownie.
into doing
Here, go.
something for the
Here's those
summoner.
kind right there.
So the summoner
There's
typically
those
offers
kind
the
right there,
demon
Bernie.
something
Brown
they
and
want,
luck right
like
here.
a bribe or some other incentive.
Brown and luck.
So the summoner typically offers the demon something they
That's the
want,
good
like a
kind.
bribe
That's
or
the
some
good
other
kind with
incentive.
being likes.
Thus, in this context, possession is not really on the minds of these demons, as they're far more interested in what deal the summoner wants to strike. But if all else fails, the purpose of the magic triangle on the ground is to contain the demon, keeping them trapped and unable to exit the triangle.
Okay,
However,
baby, just a minute.
sometimes things do go wrong, and the demon gains an upper hand on the summoner. This leads us to the deeper
Okay.
discussion of
Right
demonic
here, that's for
possession
Brown.
and exorcism, which
That's for
is really
Brown. He
quite an
likes that
ancient
kind.
concept. In fact,
Berman likes
this is
that
old as
kind.
the idea of demons itself.
Berman likes that kind.
Any type of supernatural spirit is said to have the ability to possess a living creature,
Berman
including
likes that
angels,
kind.
gods, and ghosts. And belief in spiritual possession exists in nearly every known culture, even remote islands such as those in Micronesia, as found in a study conducted by the National Institute of Mental Health in 1969. So, either possession is a real thing, or this idea is somehow inherent to the human race in order to explain things like mental illness. There are
Berman.
actually quite clear
for
distinctions
Bird.
between possession and mental illness, but we'll get into that a little bit later. From the very beginnings of Christianity, it has always been thought that Satan and his legions of demons
Here
are
for
at
Brown.
constant war with heaven.
Here for
But-
Brown.
This is more of an indirect war, because they carry out what are known as spiritual attacks on humans
Here,
in
just a
order
minute,
to
Bernie.
lead them away from God.
There go
This
Brown.
includes temptation and misfortune,
He
but
likes this
the
kind.
most
Pretty
powerful of
good.
these tactics is
Pretty
undoubtedly
good.
possession.
Pretty good, baby.
Early
Pretty
Christian
good.
writers defined 3 stages of possession. It began with
Pretty
a
good.
spiritual vulnerability, which serves as an entry point for the demon.
That's pretty
In the
good
thick of
kind.
this vulnerability
Pretty
could be
good
a
kid.
lapse in judgment or an unethical choice. After a vulnerability is identified, the demon then attempts to invade the person, and
Just a
for
minute.
one
Mama
reason
gets
or
you more.
another,
You
the
hungry?
victim voluntarily gives up
hungry. He
all
likes
control
this
to the
kid.
invader.
Mama got to break
This
it up
leads
for
to the
being
final
Bernie don't
stage,
got
which
no
is called
papers.
perfect possession.
Bernie don't
And
got teeth.
At this point, the
He
demon
doesn't
can
have
only be
teeth.
driven out through
Bernie
an
doesn't
exorcism.
have teeth, kinds. He thinks it's
Our
good
understanding
kind.
of possession
Really
and
good
exorcism
kind.
has
He
evolved
forget. He misses
dramatically
eating
over
dar
the
poo.
2,000
He
or
likes
so
to eat
years of
dar poo.
Christianity's
Real
existence,
kind.
particularly in the
Real
Catholic Church,
kind.
where
That's what he
demonology
likes.
continues to be a
That's
living
what Bean
field of study.
likes.
But
This is what
before we
Bernie
get into
likes.
modern methods of
This is the
identifying
kind
and
that
ending
Bernie
possession,
likes.
let's
Only
take a look at
likes
some
a
of the
certain
oldest
kind.
documented instances of demonic
He
possession,
only
which
likes it
are
like
found in the
this.
Bible. Beginning in the Old Testament,
This is
there are
how
only
Bean
two
likes.
clear cases of a demon
That's how
possessing
Beanie
someone,
likes it.
and the first revolves
He
around
likes
King
it
Saul.
like this kind.
The first book of Samuel
Yeah, this
describes
is the
King
good
Saul being
kind.
tormented by an evil spirit, which is only
He likes
exercised
that
after
kind.
David plays a harp for him.
This is the good
The
kind.
second case regards the false prophets that King Ahab relied on in the first book of Kings.
He likes this
These false
kind.
prophets are described as being
The
empowered
kind Bean
by a
likes.
deceiving spirit.
This is the kind
Finally,
Bean
some
likes.
theorize that the
Hold on,
necromancers
baby.
mentioned
Just
in
a
the
minute.
book of Leviticus are also possessed, as in some
That's
translations,
the kind
chapter
Bean
20,
likes.
verse 27 states that a spirit is within them. Moving on to the New Testament, there are many instances where Jesus Christ exorcised demons out of a person. In fact, this particular power of his was supposed to be evidence of him being the foretold Messiah of Israel, as prophesied by
It's the
Isaiah.
kind Bean likes.
In these instances, it's made very clear
is the
that all
kind Bean
demons
likes.
respond and submit to the authority of Jesus. And this is a vital concept,
This is the
because in
kind
summoning,
Bean
controlling,
likes.
and exorcising demons, the practitioner is pretty much always required to evoke the name of God, Jesus, the Trinity, or all of them in sequence. As a side note, I previously mentioned that in early Christianity, it was believed that a person needed to voluntarily give up control in order to be possessed.
Here go Brownie.
This idea may have come from the story of Judas Iscariot in the Gospel of John. Judas, one of the original 12 apostles of Christ, intentionally set out to agree with the devil's every suggestion in order to betray Jesus, and by doing so, he became completely possessed by the end. Jumping forward in
It's a
time,
good
our
kind, huh,
most
baby?
developed
Good
understanding
kind.
of both
This is the kind
possession
Bean
and
likes.
exorcism comes from
The
the
kind.
demonological studies conducted by the Catholic Church,
The
which
good
has
kind.
a fleet of
It's
officially
really good
sanctioned
kind. Beanie
exorcists
likes
who
this
they send out to
kind.
perform exorcisms
Beanie really
across
likes
the world
this kind.
year round.
Yep, this is the
According to the
kind
Church,
Bean
there are
likes.
6 types of what they call extraordinary demonic activity. The first is obsession, where a demon causes a person to become suddenly overwhelmed with
kind Bean
obsessive and
likes.
irrational thoughts, typically resulting in violent behavior towards
The
oneself or
kind.
others. The
Really
second is
kind.
oppression, where
He likes
there is
this
no
kind.
involuntary action or loss
This
of
is really
consciousness,
good
but
kind.
a
Beanie was
person is
hungry.
continually tormented by
He was
demons
so
through a
fucking
series of
hungry.
terrible misfortunes in their health,
He's
wealth,
such a good
family,
boy.
business, etc.
He's such a good
The third
boy.
is suffering, where demons cause physical pain, external cuts, and other injuries. This is associated with particularly powerful demons, the ones capable of fully possessing a person if nothing is done. The fourth type is infestation, where demons attach themselves to houses, objects such as dolls or statues, and even animals. The fifth is possession, where a demon takes full control over a person's body and or mind, but unlike the ancient Christian concept, it's believed that no consent from the victim is given. As before, this usually occurs after a person does something that leaves them susceptible
He likes
or
that
vulnerable
guy.
to demonic influence,
And he does. He
such as
likes
giving
this
into a
guy.
temptation.
He likes
Remember,
this
though,
guy.
this is only really something to worry about if a demon is present,
He's such a
and
good
usually the
boy.
person would have some indication that a demon is targeting them. For example, the demonic activities I just listed: obsession, oppression, suffering, and infestation. Finally, the sixth type of extraordinary
kind.
demonic activity is subjugation. And this is when a person goes out of their way to voluntarily submit to demons or the devil himself. This is found with diabolical witches, as well as certain theistic sects of Satanism that actually worship Satan. We'll get into subjugation in the final section of this video. When it comes to the modern Catholic Church's identification of extraordinary demonic activity, Catholic exorcists are careful to always conduct an array of medical and psychological examinations before proceeding with an exorcism. And
That's a
exorcism
good
can only happen
guy.
if the exorcist believes
It's a
beyond
really
any
good
doubt
guy.
that they're dealing with a genuine case of
Benny.
demonic activity.
Really good.
Absolutely no other reasonable
He
explanation
really
available.
likes that kid.
This practice is called moral certitude. So, what does a genuine demonic possession look like? Well, since medieval times up until modern day, certain criteria are used to identify genuine possession. These include superhuman strength, speaking in languages unknown to the victim, revealing accurate knowledge of past, present, or future events,
Just a minute,
again,
Minnie.
unknown to the victim, and aversion or intense hatred toward holy symbols such as a cross, names such as Jesus, or places such as a church.
Just a minute, baby.
Then there
Just a
are
minute.
unnatural body contortions, a cold feeling in the room that seems to follow the victim, levitation of objects, and finally a change in their voice that is strikingly guttural, ancient, and unhuman.
He's so funny.
Now, if a person
Really
is
so
clearly
funny.
possessed by a demon, an exorcism might not only
Let's
be
go to
justified,
Cannes, man.
it could be the only way
We're
to
just
save them.
fucking go to Cannes.
For example, there is the famous Roland Doe case, which the novel and movie The
Just a minute.
Exorcist was based off of. Roland Doe was an anonymous 14-year-old boy who was introduced to a Ouija board by his
Just a
aunt,
minute,
who was a
brother.
fortune teller. If you don't know, a Ouija board is a tool used to send and receive messages from the spirit world, and this is likely what made Roland Doe susceptible to possession. Not long after he
Just a
used the
minute.
Ouija board, the family began to hear strange noises in their house, followed by heavy furniture moving and even a vase levitating when the boy was in the room. The boy also began to speak Latin, a language he did not know, in a deep guttural voice.
You're so
After a
funny, dude.
recommendation from their local pastor, the Roman Catholic priest Edward Hughes
That's
was
such a
called
good
in to
boy.
perform an exorcism on Roland Doe. It's vital to understand that an exorcism is not simply a ritual, but more of a confrontation against a demon, an actual battle. This is why the possessed person needs to be restrained, so they can't harm themselves or others, and especially the exorcist. The exorcist is trained to recite a series of ancient prayers, specifically the Lord's Prayer, the Litany of the Saints, the Hail Mary, and the Athanasian
Just a
Creed.
minute, Beanie. He's so
These are
funny.
always
He's
spoken in
so
Latin.
funny. He's enjoying
Once
this.
the
This is
exorcism
good.
begins, the
This is
exorcist
really
must
good. My
proceed
mama
forward
got me
and
dinner.
continue the prayers no
Mama got
matter what
me dinner,
occurs, or
friends.
however long it takes.
Man likes
If
this
he were to
shit.
stop the ritual or be interrupted, this could spell grave danger for the exorcist. This process is extremely taxing, and thus the exorcist does make himself vulnerable in order to perform it. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that a failed exorcism will result in the possession of the exorcist. In the case of Roland Doe, the boy was strapped tightly against his bed during the exorcism, but
Just a minute.
somehow he managed to slip out of his restraints, rip into the bed's mattress and pull out a spring, then slash the priest with it, causing a
Just a minute.
serious injury that ended the exorcism prematurely. It's actually pretty common for an exorcism to fail, especially due to violent reactions from the victim, and exorcisms can take multiple days, even weeks of near constant prayer and ritual. In Roland Doe's case, his exorcism required 3 separate
Just a minute,
attempts
Papa.
and 4 priests, one of which had his nose broken during the process. After Roland Doe had been exorcised, the boy returned to his normal self and went on to live a completely ordinary life. Thankfully, this happy ending is not only common, but it's the goal of all exorcisms.
You're so funny.
When the ritual
dude.
finally succeeds,
He likes
there
to
is a
eat dog
noticeable
food like
feeling
that.
that
He
the
likes
demonic
dog
presence
food, but
has
he
left
don't
the
love
room,
her paper goods.
and the previously
His mama got
possessed
to
person
crush it out.
feels such a relief that they become extremely emotional, a feeling typically described as being reborn. At least to me, being possessed by demons sounds like a pretty terrible ordeal, not something which a person might want to experience. But what if I told you that some people actually sought out this kind of relationship with demons? Would it surprise you that throughout history, demon
Just a
worship
minute.
and the hope of possession was totally a thing, independent of rumor and hysteria? This leads us to our final obsessively detailed dive into Christian demonology, which is the discussion of witchcraft and its relationship with demon worship.
Okay, here you go, baby.
Of course,
Never
most
my boy.
witches perform pagan rituals,
You're so
not
funny,
necessarily
dude.
satanic ones.
So proud of bird.
Moreover, many witches
Good
throughout history were
cat.
never
You
actually
like
witches
good
at all, but
cat.
simply
He
accused of being.
enjoys this cat.
However, it's a fact that a small minority of witches did closely associate themselves with demonic activity, and these groups are the ones we'll be discussing, along with their strange and dark rituals to invite demons into themselves.
It's the second baby.
In a very general sense, witchcraft can be defined as manipulation of supernatural forces. For example, placing a hex, curse, or blessing on someone. Even casting an enchantment spell or mixing herbs into a love potion. In a more modern sense, it could also mean a pagan practice of, for example, divination, in which the unknown is revealed or the future is told. Unfortunately, there is a subset of witchcraft that deals with causing intentional harm, misfortune, or even death through demonic means. This negative practice is known more specifically as diabolical witchcraft. When discussing this topic, a clear line deserves to be drawn between diabolical witchcraft and traditional witchcraft. Whereas traditional witchcraft was essentially just following a pagan religion. However, as we covered early on, there was a lot of confusion during the early years of Christianity as to what was considered demonic. Remember that early Christian authorities believed that pagan gods were not actually gods, but demons in disguise. This is why, in the first century, the Apostle Paul wrote that, quote, "What pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be partners with demons," end quote. This belief that any pagan worship was demon worship carried on into the 10th century, where canon law stated that, quote, "Certain wicked women turned aside after Satan, seduced by the illusions and phantasms of demons, believe and profess that in the hours of the night they ride upon certain beasts with Diana, the goddess of the pagans," end quote. The Diana mentioned here is the goddess of the moon in Roman and Hellenistic religion, but in this case, medieval Christian authorities are interpreting her as a demon posing as a pagan deity. Depending on your beliefs, perhaps you agree or disagree with them, but for now, we'll turn our focus to what is not pagan religion, but genuine diabolical witchcraft, where witches intentionally evoke and worship what they know to be actual evil demons for the purposes of harmful magic, also known as sorcery. This is the fundamental difference between the two. Another trigger warning, by the way, probably for this whole section, as there are multiple disturbing sexual and violent acts that I'll briefly mention. I'll do my best not to be so graphic, but viewer discretion is strongly advised. To begin, the practice of diabolical witchcraft was heavily documented in Western Europe around the 15th century, and there were four key elements to this practice. First, the witch would make a binding pact with Satan or another powerful demon by evoking them in order to bow to them and submit to their authority. Second, there was sexual congress, which was thought to be literal sexual intercourse with the demon, or a surrogate who was possessed by that demon. And this could have been an idol, another person, or even an animal such as a goat. The purpose of sexual congress was to seal the initial pact. Third, diabolical witches would perform acts of harmful magic, the sorcery I mentioned earlier. This was to carry out the objectives of the devil. Finally, the fourth element was the night flight, or demonic Sabbath, which definitely wasn't the Jewish or Christian Sabbath, but rather a regular gathering of witches at midnight in order to meet with Satan himself. The late 16th century French text, titled The Antichrist, provided a testimony and description of what this demonic Sabbath looked like, and I quote, "An Italian man took her to a field on St. John's Eve. The man made a large ring with a rod of holly, muttering a few words which he read from a black book. Thereupon appeared a large horned goat, all black, accompanied by two women, as well as a man dressed as a priest. The goat asked the Italian who this girl was, and having replied that he had brought her to be his, the goat made him make the sign of the cross with his left hand. Then he commanded all of them to come and greet him, which they did, kissing his rear. The goat had a lighted black candle between his two horns, from which the others lit their own candles. The goat took the woman aside, laid her in the woods, and carnally knew her, to which he took an extreme displeasure, suffered much pain, and felt his seed as cold as ice. Beyond the demonic Sabbath, diabolical witches would also participate in a now infamous ritual known as a Black Mass. In Catholic tradition, Mass is a central ritual of worship in which a series of rites and prayers are carried out in a very specific order to connect oneself with God. On the contrary, a Black Mass is essentially a parody,
Here, Brady.
where all the chants of Mass are said in reverse and everything is opposite, including an inverted crucifix on the altar. The origins of this parody practice go all the way back to the 8th century, with one of the first
gonna
major
fix it
groups
for you,
accused of worshipping Satan, known as the Armenian Paulicians. The local
That's a
church
good
leader,
boy.
John of Ogen, declared the Paulicians to be sons of Satan after witnessing them gathering at night to perform a Black Mass, and, in particular, a blasphemous version of the Eucharist. In Catholic Mass, the Eucharist is a ceremony
No,
where
right
wine
here,
is
yeah,
consumed.
right here.
And in the case of the Paulicians, they allegedly drank infant blood instead. Many rumors surround the Black Mass, so it's not entirely clear what's fact and what's exaggeration, or even simply made up.
Such a good boy.
However, there was a real group in the 13th century known
Good
as
boy.
the
Here's more dog
Luciferians,
poop.
which more than half a
I
dozen
sure
credible
love
sources,
you.
including the Luciferians themselves, have pretty much confirmed without a doubt their rituals
good
of
boy.
devil and demon worship. The Luciferians named themselves after Lucifer, the former heavenly name of the fallen angel Satan. The Luciferians believed that Lucifer and his army of fallen angels were unfairly expelled from heaven, and that Lucifer would someday return to defeat and overthrow God and claim the throne of heaven as his own.
Little nice.
In order to
And here's
support
a
this
goat right
objective,
there for the
this group
dog.
did pretty much everything they
The
could
full
to
roll
offend God
for
and
for
all
you,
things Christian,
for you,
believing their reward would be
for you.
everlasting paradise in heaven with Lucifer.
I sure love you.
Examples of this include their initiation rite, where a newcomer would kiss a toad, a duck, or a goose and exchange saliva with it. They would also hold large feasts where a massive black cat was the centerpiece. This cat was believed to be possessed by a great demon, if not Lucifer himself, and only the most worthy would be allowed to kiss the cat's rear end. After worshipping the cat, the candles lighting the feast would be blown out, and what proceeded was a massive orgy between members, some of whom were blood related. Though it's arguably not as disturbing as the demonic Sabbath or Black Mass, the Luciferians of the 13th century are one of the most reliable accounts of real demon worship. Today, demon worship, diabolical witchcraft, and sorcery absolutely still exist in small cults. Demonic possession still occurs, and demonology continues to be studied and expanded upon in the Catholic Church. Unlike most other occult sciences, demonology is very much alive and relevant in modern day. You can check out my video, The Curse of Led Zeppelin, for a more modern take on sealing a deal with the devil. But for now, we've covered incredible ground. We learned about the origins of Christian demonology, what demons actually are, and what kind of powers they possess, how they're categorized, how to evoke, how to exorcise, and even how to worship. By watching this video in its entirety, I hereby grant you the title of amateur demonologist. But don't go out summoning, or I might have to call a professional. By the way, I would love to cover more on demonology, especially from the perspectives of Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Islam, as well as the religions of the East like
Yep, you're
Shinto,
right, bitch.
Buddhism, and Hinduism. So please,
You're
let me know
right
if you
about
want more
that.
of this
You
subject.
definitely are right.
One love to my patrons for supporting my work. And if you want to support, there's a link in the description.
This is my guy.
I'm
This
Mr.
is my guy.
Mythos.
This is
You
my
guys
guy.
are awesome. I'll see you in the
Come on,
next
Dad,
one.
there you go.
Peace.
There you go. It's okay. It's okay, Brown. That's the good kind, man. That's the good kind. That's the good kind. Here, Mom, will get you some water. Here, baby, there's more water. There's more water for baby. Get some water, baby. There's some water for you. There's your water. Love you. You're a good boy. Yippers. Are you a good boy? Yes, you are. Mm-hmm. Yes'm. Barney, I love you. You fucking stupid, silly whore. You're a dumb, silly fucking whore, bitch. You are a stupid fucking whore. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, we gotta look at this U.S. Department. Medicare and you. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Behind the conspiracy. I'll tell you.
So, you want to get hired before summer ends? The hottest tech companies are desperate to hire for
George Bush, Justin Bieber, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, every Chinese emperor, Queen Elizabeth, Mark Zuckerberg. What do all these people have in common? Well, all of them hide a dark and cold secret just beneath their artificial skins. According to 4% of Americans, that is.
Explain yourself.
In 2013, public polling revealed that a small but not entirely negligible portion of the United States population subscribed to the idea that a race of shape-shifting lizard people control our world by taking on human form and gaining power. By comparison, the same poll found that 7% of respondents believed the moon landing was fake, and 5% claimed the Beatles member Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was secretly replaced with a body double. Ever since around the early 2000s, there has been this idea floating around in our popular consciousness that a collection of famous people, from our political leaders to celebrities, are secretly reptile-like aliens disguised as humans. These mysterious beings from another planet have been delicately influencing us throughout our distant and not-so-distant past for malicious purposes. They control the government and popular culture. telling us what to think and what to do.
We could be a food source.
Admittedly, it is one of the more absurd and nutty conspiracies out there, and to most people, it has rightfully become a sort of widespread joke. However, for others, it is no joke at all. There are people who emphatically believe in this conspiracy, often citing evidence from history, cultural mythology, and archaeology that supposedly supports its existence. Where does this reptilian conspiracy come from, exactly? What is the alleged evidence held up in its defense? And why are there people who actually believe in it? To answer these questions, I have a special guest joining us today, Dr. David Miano from the World of Antiquity channel.
Hi, Trey. Thanks for having me. I am really excited to be talking about reptilians with you. It's going to be fun. I'll offer my observations as they come up. Let's get into it.
So sit back and enjoy this installment of Behind the Conspiracy, Reptilians. Despite the claims of many of its proponents, the idea of reptilians is relatively young. It appears that we only need to go back a little under 100 years to see its origins. This specific origin story is often mentioned in various pieces of reptilian media. As the story goes, on January 29, 1934, the Los Angeles Times newspaper reported that an engineer by the name of George Warren Shufelt had conducted a mining survey beneath the city of LA, specifically under Fort Moore Hill. Shufelt claimed to have discovered, with the help of a so-called radio X-ray machine, a complex labyrinth of underground tunnels and catacombs. His X-ray pictures revealed rooms of solid gold and massive subterranean passages, going as deep as 100 feet below the surface. And according to him, this intricate network formed the shape of a lizard. After consulting with a Hopi Indian by the name of Little Chief Greenleaf, Shufelt concluded that the tunnels were in fact something out of an old Hopi legend, the remains of a vast underground city built 5,000 years ago, not by humans, but by the lizard people. According to Chief Greenleaf, there was once 3 such cities along the Pacific coast of North America, constructed in order to escape some kind of great fiery cataclysm. 1,000 families of these lizard people dwelled beneath the earth, keeping records on gold tablets. This ancient race was also incredibly intelligent. The intellectual accomplishments of their 9-year-old children were equal with those of present-day college graduates. We are told that all of Schufelt's attempts to excavate this forgotten city beneath the city were unsuccessful, to say the least. We will talk about this more in depth later, but according to most retellings, funding on his project dried up, and his findings never saw the light of day. The ruins of the lizard people and their dozens of gold treasures are allegedly still down there in the dark, just beneath the bustling streets and sidewalks of America's second largest city. From Schufelt's original discovery, we see the emergence of several similar conspiracies. Soon after, in the 1940s, occultist and writer Maurice Doreal wrote a little-known pamphlet entitled Mysteries of the Gobi, where he describes a serpent race with bodies like man, but heads like a great snake. These snake men had the ability to take human form. In an unspecified prehistoric era, they engaged in a violent war with humans and were driven to near extinction. Where Doreal got this information is anyone's guess. In the 1990s, Doreal's writings would later influence conspiracy theorist David Icke. Icke's writings are a whole nother story, but essentially just expanded on these original concepts, that a race of ancient lizard-like creatures from another star live underground in bases throughout the world, and have disguised themselves as influential humans. Mainly royal bloodlines and wealthy dynasties, the Bush family, the British royal family, and etc. These creatures secretly feasted on human flesh or had some other malicious purpose in mind for us. Icke's influence took these relatively unknown ideas to the mainstream, and as a result, the conspiracy of the reptilians, or reptoids, took on a new life and resonated particularly well among right-wing conspiracy theorists. It is claimed that humans for thousands of years have been encountering these beings, and evidence of these interactions have been preserved in the artwork and stories of ancient humans. In the wake of this surge, believers searched the past for corroborating evidence. Ancient Aliens featured several of these in their episode, and I will give a brief overview of them before we take a closer look.
At Harvard Business School, we have a unique approach to online learning. Each course is developed by leading faculty and features immersive case studies, interactive teaching tools, and a supportive peer learning community. You want to advance, and we want to help you get there. It's why we created an online learning experience that brings participants together from around the world and gives them real-world business skills.
One of the most common examples used to prove the existence of reptilians are these mysterious figurines from Neolithic Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. They are one of the few pieces of physical evidence, tangible artifacts, used by proponents. Archaeologists know them as the Ubayyad lizard people figurines, excavated from several Mesopotamian sites, such as the prehistoric cities of Ur and Eridu. The clay statuettes are all dated to the Ubayyad period of the region, and depict humanoids with thin and elongated bodies, coffee bean-shaped eyes, and pinched noses that give their faces an overall reptilian-like appearance. Ancient Aliens posits that they are too realistic to depict mythological or fantasy creatures, and are in fact based on the real deal, living, breathing lizard men and women encountered by our early ancestors. In addition to these figurines, reptilian proponents use a wide variation of mythological stories and religious texts from cultures around the world to suggest they are all talking about the same thing. Several cultures mention reptile gods or powerful snake-like beings. As we mentioned before, Shufelt believed that the Hopi tribe of North America had one such story. Ancient Aliens primarily focuses on the Hebrew Bible. The Bible references the existence of a serpent race called the Sephirim. According to them, the snake, or Nahash, in the Garden of Eden was just one of a race, and was completely human prior to God punishing it for tempting Eve in the garden. South Asian mythology mentions the Nagaras. Ancient Aliens defines them as a semi-divine race of serpent people, with the Well of Sashana, gods of Mesoamerica, are also viewed as lizards. I could go on, but according to legend, unmistakable similarities that lend credence to the idea that humans have been interacting with a race of advanced subterranean humanoids pretty regularly throughout history, from at least the Neolithic until relatively recent times, this periods and so on. Now, this is a lot to unpack. At a surface, you seem a tad bit compelling, but it's only because of the way books, TV shows like Ancient Aliens have phrased